Hi, church. I wanted to do something just a little bit different because we're reading through the book of James, and we're going to get to next Sunday, this Sunday coming up, we're going to get to quite a big passage. It's not long in terms of words, but in terms of background and impact, then it's quite, it needs quite a lot of thought in it. And I just wanted to take a moment beforehand just to do a bit of a longer introduction that I couldn't do on the Sunday, but for those that want to just do a bit of thinking before we get there, just to give you something just to mull over, really. And that's the whole thing of we get into the passage in James about when James talks about faith and works. And many people have talked about this. It's a controversial passage mainly because the way that James uses his language seems to be contradictory to the way that Paul uses language in Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, in his letters. And so there's always been this play-off about who's right? Is it James versus Paul? Is one right and one wrong? Which opens the door to so many questions about biblical authority, about what's right in the Bible and what's wrong. Can we learn? Can we listen to some parts of the Bible, not others? What has authority over us? And the thing is that going down those paths is very takes you to somewhere that you shouldn't go, that I don't believe is right for us, that the whole Bible is authoritative over us, and we should learn to want to accept all of it and understand all of it. So it matters that we grapple with this and grapple with the conversations here between James and Paul, essentially. But how do we do that? Well, one of the real main ways is to recognize all of the things that are before us when we read the Bible, all of the things that shape how we think and how we view the world, what people call the worldview, our worldview, everything that goes into that. How do we regard things out in the world? How do we interpret stuff? And when we come to this part in James, it's like, what is influencing the way that I personally feel? And a big thing for us, we're evangelical Christians, we're charismatic Christians, but we're part of the Christian faith, part of the denomination, a part of the whole part of church, I guess, which is called Reformed. It's us that we're part of the church that came out of the Reformation that happened back in that started with Martin Luther and his contemporaries back. It started in the 16th century, in the early 16th century. Martin Luther was a professor at the time. He was an academic, but also a pastor. Him and many of his contemporaries had a problem with the Roman Catholic Church. He posted what's called Thesis. He posted academic papers to other people that were there to engage in conversation, to start debate. And it's so, this thing that happened in the Reformation was massive. It led to huge breakup in the church, in the one church that was there. It was just Roman Catholic in Western Europe. There was Orthodox in Eastern Europe and beyond, and down obviously into different Africa and the Middle East and places. But here in the Western Europe, it was the Roman Catholic Church at the time, and so here in the 16th century we started a breakup. And it was massive. It had so big a schism, such big repercussions that states. It ended up with wars between states, between countries within Europe. But what was it in these papers? What was the problem that Martin Luther and his contemporaries had? Well, It was to do with the Roman Catholic Church, some of the people, the bishops, cardinals within the church, selling some kind of relief from suffering in the afterlife. I had a whole thing of you could buy and pay for relief from suffering, and it wasn't done in a pastoral sense. It was done, it was abused by certain people within the church. And Martin Luther had a fundamental problem with this, but he had a theological problem with this, and that was that we can't buy or contribute any way to our relief from God's wrath because of our sin. That salvation has come from Jesus alone. He has paid for our forgiveness of sins, and he has accepted and taken upon himself the wrath from God, both for sins, both here and in any life that comes after this. We're no longer under condemnation. We have been saved. And therefore we can't contribute to it. We do nothing to contribute to it via anything that we do. Any action that we do, we can't contribute to it at all. We are, to use Paul's metaphor, justified. It's a legal term that Paul uses quite a lot in his letters. It says we're justified, we are free, we are declared not guilty anymore because of Jesus and the accepting of the gift, the grace gift, through our faith. So Paul writes in Galatians, he says, we know that a person is not justified by works of the law, but through faith in Christ Jesus. Or in Romans, for we hold that one is justified by faith apart from works of the law. And then we get to James 2 and verse 24, where he writes really clearly, he says, you see, a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And at what point we go, but didn't Paul say the opposite? And we end up in a bit of a quandary here. We can end up in a quandary of thinking that the Bible is contradictory and all of those things. And what we have to recognise is that someone like Luther battled really hard to get the understanding of we're saved by grace alone. And so he had big trouble of accepting the letter of James, really, as authoritative in the same way that other parts of the Bible had. What we need to do is recognise that our experiences and our understanding, just like Luther, they're like tinted glasses. They get in the way of everything that we read from the Bible. We're seeing through these tinted glasses of our experiences, of our understanding, and we're reading the Bible through them, and that can stop us from hearing what God has to say. We are part of the Reformed Church. We believe in the grace gift of God, that we, just like Luther, just like the contemporaries here, the Calvins of this world, that Jesus has done it all for us. And when we come to James, well, James has got something else to say. He's not going against that. He's speaking something else. So we need to recognise our experiences. We need to recognise, some of the terminology and language that we've got into using so much, and recognise that it's there. Not declare that we can just take it off and see, through clear glass, but we're always going to have that background for how we read. But if we do recognise that it's there, we can come with a bit more openness to receiving what God has to say to us through James. And I believe he has got some really important things to say to us as a church and as Jesus' disciples. We recognise that we are part of the Reformed Church. We believe in salvation by faith alone. But James is not writing to Dartford Community Church. He's not writing to you and me right here. He's writing to all of Christian Church. He's not using our language, he's using his language. And we need to kind of get on board with that and understand, recognize where James is coming from, and to understand what the Spirit is trying to say to us through James. So I want to just encourage you, if you get a moment, have a read through it before Sunday. James chapter 2, verses 14 to, I think it's verse 26. Just have a read through it. Recognize how you feel when you read these certain words. What do you think? What do you react when you read this passage? And recognizing that can help us to just be more open when we come to receive what God's got to say to us when I preach on Sunday, and how he wants to shape us and draw us on. So just pray, that we come with open eyes and open hearts and minds to receive what the Spirit has to say to us. Hope this has just been a little bit helpful, just to explain some of the background, introduce the passage before we get there, and just hopefully help you engage with what the Bible has and what God has to say to us. God bless you, be with you this week, and I look forward to preaching for you on Sunday.